Are you a dog behavior geek like me? Join me for my absolute favorite weekend of the year, the 2025 Dog Behavior Conference. If you've attended before, you know how special the DBC is. And if you've never joined us for this amazing 3-day online event, it's truly a one-of-a-kind gathering of like-minded dog geeks, pet pros, trainers, and animal advocates from all over the world. Registration is now open at dogbehaviorconference.com, and the virtual live conference takes place on April the 4th to the 6th. And discounted early bird seats are on sale now through January. So, reserve your spot today at dogbehaviorconference.com. That's dogbehaviorconference.com. I'll see you there. Welcome to the podcast, everybody. Today's guest is none other than the fabulous Tom Candy. It is the first time he's been on a Positively podcast. I don't know why it's taken me so long to have him on this podcast, because I see him all the time when we go to various events, and I see him at seminars, and I hear of his incredible work, and he just is a light in the behavior and training world as well as the rescue world. He is a clinical animal behaviorist, the founder of Simplifying Shelter Behaviour, and he is presenting at this year's 2025 Dog Behavior Conference on laughter and tears, frustration for dogs and owners in the shelter and beyond. Oh my goodness, do we need to hear from Tom Candy? Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. You've been a big inspiration in my rescue and training and behaviour journey, so I'm utterly joyed to join you on the podcast.
Thank you so much. Now, I know that you do a lot of different conferences. You speak at a lot of different seminars. You have your own Facebook page, Simplifying Shelter Behaviour, something that is much needed, not just in the UK, but around the world. And at the conference, you are talking laughter and tears about frustration, not just frustration for dogs in the shelter, but frustration for dogs and guardians outside, because it can be a hard journey. Now, before we get into that, what is the shelter industry like right now in the UK? What is the situation? I think, as I heard, it's definitely changed since the pandemic. Is that right? Or has it got better? Has it got worse? What is it like?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting time in shelter and rescue all over, I think. And like you said, the pandemic is definitely kind of like a key point that we can pick out as some of the changes starting to come through. It's quite a tricky time at the minute. There seems to be less homes coming through, and the people who are looking for dogs want your more kind of easy to get along with dogs without any sort of major or any really problematic behaviours. So that can then be difficult when we're starting to rehome dogs that might have bad experiences or struggle in the world that we're living in at the minute. So there's that element of it. Obviously in the UK and in other places we also have the financial crisis, the cost of living crisis, which obviously impacts, again, people deciding to get a dog and the type of dogs that they're getting, and decisions that they have to make with any dogs they've got. So we might be seeing more dogs with medical concerns as well as behavioural concerns because people are struggling to afford the insurance or the vet treatment, all of the stuff that comes with dog owning. So we've seen this sort of perfect storm of more dogs needing help, less people being able to take dogs out of the system, which obviously makes space for more dogs to come in, and then some of the dogs that we're seeing are more challenging. We're obviously still getting our dogs that might just be changing owner circumstance or no fault of their own, but it's a really difficult time at the minute where we're trying to create new processes and procedures that support dogs and owners better, but whilst kind of working in this crisis. It's a crisis state at the minute. So yeah, it's a tricky one.
Are you seeing more dogs in shelters than ever before then?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is not necessarily more dogs in shelters because the physical space hasn't necessarily changed, but the demands for services are a lot more. So all of the large rescue organisations in the UK and a number that I know in the States and elsewhere are all saying their handover calls are higher. You know, there's more people demanding or needing support, but the support packages are still the same. So the capacity to care is something that we talk about a lot, and that hasn't necessarily changed, and in a lot of ways is difficult. What we're seeing is a shift maybe towards more preventative rescue, so looking at how we can actually support dogs in the homes they're in currently, rather than having to bring them into a centre and then rehome them. So that could look like direct adoption, so the dog stays with the family and a rescue supports that adoption to move to a new home. It could be things like supportive vet care, food banks, the type of things. So rescue's trying to shift away from that sort of brick and mortar model to supporting dogs in situ, but obviously there's a lead-in time for that where we're still having to deal with both things at once. So yeah, it's a really interesting time because a lot of good change will come out of this, but there's a bit of a delay in it happening, which is stressful.
So what are some of the frustrations that you're seeing actually in the shelter with dogs? What would you say are the main ones?
Well, if we think of like the definition of frustration, there's sort of, on the dog side of things, there's three main criteria that we think of, which is previous expectations not being met, the dog being thwarted or prevented from doing something that they want to do, and autonomous control. So keeping hold of things they've already got, or another example of autonomous control is, not wanting to be groomed or see the vet and not being able to get away because they're being physically restrained. And if we think about those three things, we straight away see things that are going to be in the shelter all of the time. So often we don't know about the dog's previous expectations. We might not know where they come from. We don't know if the previous owner let them on the sofa or fed them at 12 o'clock or any of those sort of things. And the other challenge in shelter and rescue is there's more than one person caring for that dog. Yeah. So Thursday, Friday, Saturday might be John, and then John goes off to have his 2 days off, and if he doesn't leave great notes, we might not know that John has been using treats to put the harness on a dog, and the next person comes in, doesn't see the note, doesn't use treats, and the dog's frustrated because for 4 days he's been getting treats for his harness. So that's one element of it, and then like we said, things like seeing the dog next to you go out is really frustrating. I want to be out of my kennel and my buddy next door has just gone out, and we start to see things like lunging, barking, those typical frustrated based behaviours where the dog's missing out on something they think they should be involved in, which is obviously a little bit of anthropomorphizing, but the general gist.
What about the infrastructure? Obviously there's a lot of existing shelters in the UK, a lot of existing shelters here, but there are also some brand new shelters here. And I'm thinking about, like, with the infrastructure changes, can we make that dog stay at a physical shelter better?
Yeah, and so like we said, with the frustration side of things linking into that is a big consideration at the minute is during the pandemic and post, we lost a lot of staff. Lots of people were sort of reviewing their life and making changes to their jobs and things. And that's something that we've seen across the board. It's not a specific rescue and shelter problem. But with that, we've lost a lot of experience, which means new people coming in need training up. And again, there's a bit of a lead-in time for that. So that then affects dogs who might have slightly more challenging behaviours in kennels or have a slightly different need for adoption, because it might remove a little bit of focus from the dog. So not from want of trying from the staff, but obviously it takes time to train people up, and people with less experience might not have all of the skills they need to progress the dogs in our care. And ultimately, that's what we're sort of looking for, really, is the best way to reduce frustration in dogs in our care is to get them out as soon as possible. And the quickest way we can do that is to have them as likely to be successful in the home as they can be. And that, so in a lot of cases, might take some training or adjustment to their situation and their scenarios, and all of that needs those skills and experience that we've just mentioned.
So in the US here, it really, by state actually, you can maybe predict the type of dogs that you're going to have in a shelter. So for example, down here in the South, I would say probably 85% of our dogs in the shelter are some kind of bully type breed. A lot of pit bulls, Cane Corsos, Presi Canarios, a lot of those kinds of dogs down here in the South. Over in the West, there are those dogs too, but there tends to be more Chihuahuas. And so is there something similar in the UK? Are you seeing, or is it just a sort of smorgasbord of all kind of different dogs? Or are you seeing, depending on where people live, different shelters tend to have different dogs?
It's a real mix. So definitely a couple of years ago, I would say you could say the same thing. Yeah, so our centres in Wales quite often had bully breeds, and that is still true. But we also saw a lot of like farm collies and those sort of breeds. And then other places, you'd see more terriers if it was more rural. But it has changed. And what we are seeing is a lot more large breed dogs. And I always think back to a time where I've worked in shelter and rescue for 15 years now, and I maybe remember seeing one or two St. Bernards sort of pre-pandemic. And then post-pandemic, I look after a region of centres. At the time, it was 5 centres, and I remember having 5 St. Bernards. We had one at every centre.
Wow.
So we're really seeing this shift in, I would say, more pedigree dogs coming in as well, or dogs that look to be of pedigree type, and definitely an increase in larger breeds. And that's, again, reported across multiple organisations.
Let me ask you, this might be a difficult question to answer. It might not be, but I know it's kind of like a touch point. The XL bully ban, how has that affected the shelters and rescue? Because I know certainly in the beginning, I think things were quite chaotic. What is it like now?
Yeah, so we're pretty much, can't remember the exact date, but we're pretty much a year into the XL bully ban. Generally speaking, because the different parts of the UK took different approaches, so they're sort of all different timelines. And yes, at the time it was announced, and during the exemption process, so where people could register their dog so that it didn't have to be taken away or destroyed, the government weren't massively forthcoming with information for shelters and rescues, so it was a lot of sort of fumbling through the dark to work out what the best option was. Some rescues made the decision that they were going to try and rehome as many XL bullies as possible before the ban. Some struggled with that concept and either looked to keep them in care or had to make other decisions, difficult decisions based on the time. So it was really difficult and chaotic. One of the biggest parts of it was the information around what an XL bully was quite limited. So again, you had a lot of sort of difficult decisions being made for dogs that actually maybe now wouldn't fit the criteria. And I would say it's, from the shelter and rescue point of view, it's settled down a bit now, except from in places where a rescue might be working with dogs under the stray dog contract. So if they have the stray dog contract, and obviously that means they take in any dog that comes in.
Yep.
And if one of those dogs comes in and is typed as an XL bully, or any of the other banned breeds, the rescue has no choice other than to euthanize. There is no legal pathway for that dog. So lots of rescue, which is really difficult for the staff. It's really difficult for everybody involved in that, because there'll always be euthanasia in rescue. It is a fact of it, whether it's for space, behaviour. It's a really difficult environment.
Yep.
And nobody takes those decisions lightly, but having that decision completely taken out of your control, I think really hits, for me particularly, it hits a different place in my heart, because some of these dogs can be absolutely amazing and really loving and really sweet, and there's just no route for them. It's not even a case of, we can't find them a home. There isn't that option there. So there's still some challenges, but rescues legally can't take them either. So unless you've got a stray dog contract, a lot of rescues aren't having contact with XL bullies because we're legally not allowed to accept them in any way.
Gosh, how difficult and how heart-wrenching. I mean, as you say, rescue is a very difficult thing, a very, very emotional job anyway, to work with these animals. But also to have to make decisions like that is hard anyway, but to have that control taken completely away from you because it is against the law and this is what you have to do, that's devastating. I applaud people who volunteer and work in rescue. I think it's a very rewarding job in many ways as well, but it's also really hard. How do you deal with burnout, not just for yourself, but for people who work with you? what is the best way that you could keep yourself sane?
Yeah, it's a really great question, and I think it's one that's becoming more and more important across a lot of industries. Obviously, there's a paper that came out from Protoprova et al. A couple of years ago that said, mental health and compassion fatigue and burnout in shelter and rescue is really high, and it's really difficult. It's actually something that I went through last year or the year before, and I hadn't really noticed that I was burnt out. But like I mentioned earlier, I travel a lot with work, I drive to different centres, and what I noticed when I was speaking to a colleague is I was almost on autopilot. So I was just driving to the centre, doing what I needed to do, and driving home, not really thinking it, not really feeling it. And it was a really interesting time for me because that is something that I haven't had to deal with previously. So it really got me thinking and looking at a lot of these things. I think it's really important that we have time away from dogs. I know that sounds weird on a dog podcast because we all love dogs. That's why we do it. Whether we work in rescue, whether we're training behaviour, a dog walker, we do it because we like animals. Because let's be honest, the pay's not great, the weather's not great in the UK, so there's not a lot of reasons to do it otherwise. So it becomes really difficult, but we need to take that step away and give us the opportunity to decompress, breathe, do something different. That could be like a hobby that you enjoy doing. It could be spending time with friends and family outside of the dog world, because again, you naturally
Yes.
about dogs.
Who of my friends are not in the dog world? Yeah, not many actually.
Yeah. So it really depends, and it's finding that thing that helps you. So for me, I am like a true water baby. I surf, I stand up paddleboard. I'm really lucky to live in North Devon in the UK, really close to the seaside.
Oh, so jealous. It's such a beautiful place.
But we're actually moving. So at the minute, I'm probably about a 15-minute walk from the sea. And we're moving to be a 5-minute walk from the sea.
No, Tom,
so,
now I'm really jealous.
I know.
Oh,
sorry.
my goodness. Wow.
So for me, it's getting in the water, having a swim, scuba diving, something that I can really just switch off and recover. And the way that I always think about it is often we can feel guilty when we choose to do things for ourselves, particularly if we work in stressful environments where there are things that rely on us, in this case dogs, because we can feel like we're taking something away from them for ourselves. But we've got to remember that if we're not showing up as our best self, we can never do the best for those dogs. So we've got to kind of move away from this idea of doing things for us is detrimental, because actually it massively improves how you turn up on the day, how your brain's functioning, everything that actually gives those animals the best chance.
What you say really hits home. And there was a spate a few years ago where I assisted on a lot of puppy mill busts, big ones, over 300, 400 dogs and puppies in terrible conditions. And when I go into these situations, it's you go in on autopilot because you have to cut your emotions off because you've got a job to do. You have to get these animals out. You have to get them. Every single animal has to go through a process so that every animal, because they're all evidence, right? If it's a criminal case, and most of them are, that it's all evidence. So all the evidence needs to be processed. And then they have to go to a holding area. And after that, then they have to be assessed both medically, behaviorally. I mean, the whole thing. So it's terribly traumatic for the dogs. It's also terribly traumatic for the people that are first on scene usually. And, and I've done a couple of dogfighting busts as well. So when I'm there, it's almost like, oh no, I can deal with this. This is okay. I'm good. I got it. It's afterwards for me. And it might not be the next day but it might be the next week or in the next couple of weeks where it suddenly hits me. And I go, oh my gosh. And I get this feeling in the pit of my stomach and all this anxiety of, my God, that was there. How many more of them are there out there? I know that there's a lot, especially here in the United States. And I start really worrying about the dogs that we've rescued, what is going to happen to them. Most of these rescues that I've been on, they've had great rescue partners and we've ensured that the dogs have gone to great homes, but it's really, really stressful. And I also understand what you say. Sometimes just in our everyday business, my husband runs the company. And sometimes I say to him, can we please not talk about dogs today? Can we just not talk about dogs? And he has other interests. And I'm writing a novel that nobody is going to read, but I'm writing it because that's my detox in a way. That's where, because obviously dealing in behavior, it gets quite emotional too. So I think what you say is really important for everybody to do.
Yeah, I agree. I've really noticed change since I've kind of recognized that I was in that space, and actually I'm back now to really enjoying what I do and be present, which is obviously super important. And there's a group of researchers at the minute with Dr. Trefefa Menis, and they're looking at compassion fatigue in shelter and rescue and how we can support this. And they're running a study currently, which is support groups over 10 weeks to see how that helps. So that's going to be really useful information. And they use the term empathic strain as well, which I hadn't come across before, but it's sort of a different view of compassion fatigue. And for me, I think it highlights what you said, Victoria. You might have an experience and then a few days later or a week later, that experience hits you. And I liked that idea of it being that strain across the board rather than compassion fatigue where you're right at the end, you're fatigued, you're tired, you're done with work, which really is what it looks like.
I just applaud as we're going to take a quick break, but I just applaud everybody who's listening to this that volunteers or works in rescue wherever in the world you are. Thank you for everything you do. Obviously, thank you, Tom, because you're amazing and you've helped so many people and you've helped so many animals in your career. But I just want to say thank you to everybody else out there that understands and knows and is going yes, I feel this. This is exactly what I'm going through. So that information is really key. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I want to talk about what can we do in shelters to make dogs' lives better. I know we talked a little bit about it, but when it comes to group play, there's organizations here in the States that really focus on group play. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? We'll talk about that after this quick break. I wanted to be sure you knew about a unique opportunity to learn with me in person this year. The Victoria Stilwell Academy's Dog Trainer course in-person track for 2025 is enrolling right now through March the 12th. Learn more by visiting vsdogtrainingacademy.com. You can enroll in free starter courses, the fully refundable fundamentals course, the flagship online dog trainer course, and, until mid-March, this year's class of VSA in-person students. Learn more and find out if the in-person track is right for you at vsdogtrainingacademy.com. Again, that's vsdogtrainingacademy.com. We'll see you there. We're back with Tom Candy. He's going to be speaking at the Dog Behaviour Conference. Very excited for that. Check out dogbehaviorconference.com and you will be able to find out who all the speakers are. And remember, it's a 3-day online conference in April. Really have some fantastic speakers speaking at it. Tom, what can we do when it comes to, I'm going to put this in sort of air quotes, socializing dogs whilst they're in the shelter? What do you think about play groups? Are they a good idea? Are they a bad idea?
Oh,
I know. I'm sorry.
I've put you
at it because, with a lot of these, most of my podcasts, I really don't give questions in advance because I like it to be a conversation. So if you'd rather not answer, then let me know, because this is a bit of a hot button issue. But yeah, what do you think?
No, it's a great question, and it's a great thing that we really need to consider. So for those that don't know, there's a couple of different sort of models around dogs, meeting other dogs in shelter and rescue. In the UK, I would say we mainly do sort of mixes of 1 or 2 dogs. That's because of space, a lot of the time, staffing, all of that sort of stuff. And then definitely more popular in the States is that idea of play groups, where you might have much larger number of dogs together playing around. And both have pros and cons. So we'll talk about the UK model first, just a little bit. I think it's really important. It's one of my favourite things to do as a member of staff. When you get a good mix and you match two dogs really nicely and they're tearing around the compound or the space, and they're really, you can see for them the stress release that it brings, the joy that it brings, and how much that dog then benefits when they go back to their kennel and they're tired or they're fulfilled. Because I don't want to make it just about exercise, so they're fulfilled and they're tired and they're sleepy, and it's so nice to see. There's also research that shows that dogs who are kennelled together or spend time with other dogs have a better time in kennels, and one of the big factors that we talked a little bit about earlier is it massively reduces length of stay. So seeing a dog kennelled with another dog, or having lots of videos of that dog playing with other dogs on the website, really helps people think, oh yeah, that's a dog that I want to bring into my house. I can go to the park. In the UK, they can go to the park, they can have a run around. And that in itself, reducing length of stay is always going to be one of our best tools for improving welfare. So that's one big side of it, massive fan. Playgroups can be equally beneficial, really helpful. Dogs absolutely love it. It's a great way to include volunteers. They're just slightly harder to do well because you've got a lot more dogs. That means a lot more personalities, a lot more potential for conflict. And we've just got to make sure that we have appropriate training and confidence in our staff and our volunteers to manage those situations well, so the dogs get equal benefit as if we're just doing smaller group mixes.
When you first get a dog out of a shelter run, a kennel run, and they might be really amped up, do you give them the opportunity to get a little bit of that frustration out first before you take them into a playgroup? Or is it what I've seen in the States here is that basically it's kennel run to playgroup? So you've got almost an explosion of energy and angst and frustration that works itself out, but that's always an initial kind of everyone's sort of in tenterhooks of like, how is it going to go?
Yeah, I think if, best case scenario would be what you said the first time. So giving that dog the opportunity to come out, have a bit of a sniff, even if it's between the kennel and the play group, using things like Sarah Fisher's ACE free work is such a great way of starting to bring those dogs' arousal levels down a little bit. The reality is they've probably been in the kennels for like 23 hours, if not more, or ideally less, but most of the time it's more. So you'd need a lot of time to really get rid of any of that. So I can see why in a time-pressured environment, we sometimes do take those dogs straight into play groups. And really it's about knowing the individual. And again, just being confident in our ability to read that and redirect the dog if needed, or take the dog to a quieter area, or adjust which dogs are in the play group so that they all meet and get on. Because what we want to 100% make sure is every dog in the play group is having just as much fun, just as much enjoyment, and just as much benefit. We don't have 3 dogs having a great time because they're chasing the dog that's sat in the corner and is really uncomfortable. So that's the hardest part, is making sure everybody's getting equal benefit from it.
Now, this is also a difficult question, but I kind of like asking, I'm asking you difficult questions. Well, what could be perceived as difficult questions? When you have a dog that is complex, what is your process for finding a home for that dog? How do you go about ensuring, that's a bit of a loaded word, but ensuring that a dog is going to be safe in a home and with the general public?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of conversations around assessments in shelter and rescue over the last probably 30 years, realistically. If you put into Google Scholar dog rescue assessment, you get something like, I did it once, something like 38,000 studies, so not articles, studies. So There's a lot of information. What we used to do, or hopefully what most people used to do, is these battery type assessments. So where you take a dog and you might introduce them to another dog, you might use a fake hand in a food bowl, you might use a fake child, and you do all of these things and you look at how the dog responds, and that's your assessment. Hopefully, most rescues and shelters are moving away from that now to a much more observational based assessment, where you're just doing things normally with the dog and you record what happens and you build that up over time. And one of the best examples of this is, rather than poking the dog with a fake hand that gives you absolutely no information because it knows it's not a real hand, and actually you're pushing them way over threshold potentially.
Yeah, I might not react if somebody pokes me with a fake hand.
Yeah, right?
I might not react well, I should say. Yeah.
They're weird things straight away. We've also got to think of the learning history of if you've got a dog who is a bit funny around the food bowl and they bite the fake hand and the fake hand goes away, you've just taught them that that's a really good way to keep hold of your food. So there's a range of issues with that sort of assessment. But when we think of the flip side, if a dog's in kennels for 5 days, we've fed them 10 times. That's 10 times that we can take information about how that dog reacted when we approached, when we put the bowl down, when we went to get the bowl back later, and that's going to give us a much better picture of the dog. So that's the same if we have dogs with any behaviours of concern where we might have a bite history or we see reactivity type behaviours, lunging, barking, growling in the centre towards people or dogs or whatever. We obviously have a duty of care to that dog, to our staff and to the public taking dogs home. So we might need to put the dogs into situations which they're going to face. So we're not purposely going to set them up for success, but if we've got a history around the dog struggling in certain situations, we might do training around those situations and see how the dog responds. Each organisation needs their own sort of lines and guidelines around what they deem as appropriate based on the resources they have available, based on what experience they have at that rehoming centre. So it's a really tricky thing to do, and like you said, you used a really loaded word, because I actually think my answer to your original question is we can't.
Yeah.
But, there's definitely steps that we can do to mitigate risk or identify risk and then work with that risk based on the resources that we've got available to us.
Yeah. I'm talking 15 years ago now, we were all about assessments. I was working with a shelter to the east of town here and east of town. And we were all about assessments. Every single dog that came into the shelter went through an assessment. And even though we gained some information, we were gaining information under quite a stressful time for this dog that is just transitioning to the shelter environment. We don't really know most of these dogs' histories because most of them are stray dogs. Or we do know the history and yet we're still doing an assessment. So the dog's already at heightened level of stress. And then the guidelines kind of showed us that we need to sort of change that. So we would do assessments over a couple of days and then a week. And then, but it was still doing setups, that we used to call it, doing setups. And I was used to think, I don't think we are putting the dog, I don't think we're giving the dog the best chance. And one of the great things I think we did was to stop that. And the other thing was to, and this is not just so much assessment based, but when we had volunteers with dogs, it wasn't just about taking the dog out for a walk or doing an enrichment session or what. It was going to a bench. And after the dog had some sniffies, just sitting and being and observing, and where the dog was able to have a little bit more autonomy of saying, I do want to sit at this bench. I'm actually quite comfortable here. Or I want to go sniff over there. It was much more watching the dog, observing the dog and seeing what the dog was telling us. And in doing that, we had a lot more buy-in. We had dogs that we were able to understand them better. So weaving that into the dogs every day, even in this stressful environment, and being able to we built a home, like we had a building that wasn't being used. And so we built it like it was a home where there was a microwave and a television, and some dogs had never even been in a home. And so actually just coming in there and being able to relax or just discovering what it was like, I felt like we were on a better track. But that was 15 years ago. And so I know things have changed since then. And I think what you say is that you're really doing better for these dogs.
Yeah, I think there's a movement towards making sure that the information that we've got and how we work with dogs in our care is as best as possible. Because the reality is they're just such difficult places to work in. If we don't do this, we're never going to see the success that we want, because we have to set up the staff and the dogs right based on the information we've got and the tools that we use.
Do you know any of the latest statistics of how many dogs there are in shelters in the UK right now?
No, is the honest answer, but it's still a large number. So the UK's largest dog welfare organisation last year had 50,000 requests for handovers.
50,000.
Yeah. So and that's one organisation. There's probably 4 or 5 large UK rescues, and then a number of smaller ones as well, who are all, I know the phones are constantly ringing. So it really is a bit of a crisis at the minute.
Yeah, Tom, that's really shocking to me in the UK, and it's a large organization, but just one organization, and an organization that does great work, but that is shocking, and it's almost like it's expected here. And especially down in the south here, which is, I mean, they took 500 dogs in just in December. It's almost off the charts here, but that's even surprised me in the UK that it's that big. Gosh, it's like, could we please cut off supply? I mean, are we still seeing that? Potentially puppies coming in from Europe, or is that still an issue? We had Lucy's Law passed, but has that had any dent in the population that's coming into shelters? Because with so much supply, then more of these dogs are going to end up in the shelter system.
Yeah, so there's a big mix of factors really that seem to be impacting on it. So the first is obviously we had the pandemic. Everybody wanted a dog, so you couldn't keep dogs in kennels. Nobody was looking to hand over dogs, so the population of dogs generally just increased. Lots of those dogs came from puppy farms or abroad, like you've just mentioned, which brings its own challenges. I think it's not something that I have a huge involvement with, but I think there has been a little bit of a decrease in dogs coming in from abroad. But I also think that's probably got a lot to do with Brexit, as well as things like Lucy's Law and obviously all of the campaigning that a lot of the large organisations do. But it is still happening. We're also still seeing dogs from being rescued abroad coming in. And another concept where we maybe weren't expecting to see it is where we're seeing the rise in cost of vet bills. People aren't getting their dogs neutered as much. In the UK, before it was quite rare to see a dog not neutered. And we know that's different in the States, but definitely over here it was sort of the norm. And where that's now becoming more expensive, or people aren't aware of it, or there's all these different conversations happening, we're then having a lot more sort of family litters or unsuspecting litters. Because of that. So there's a big sort of number of contributing factors which all just end up into this perfect storm that we've already mentioned.
At the conference, you're talking about frustration for guardians as well, that adopt dogs, and thank you for doing that, but that they need ongoing support because the dog, they might be having some kind of challenges, and not every dog that gets into the shelter system is going to be challenging for you. I think that any dog, regardless of where they come from, they're a dog, right? And so sometimes it takes people a long time to understand them and give them what they need. We're all different. Even as people, we have different needs, and dogs are no different. So, but how do you give that support? What do you say to guardians who get dogs and are like, oh my gosh, now I've got this challenge here. I have this idea of the perfect dog that I wanted. I was really excited, did my duty, went to the shelter, got a dog. And now I'm like at sea. I don't know what to do.
It's really interesting because I know, Vicky, you'll have seen the same when you did It's Me and the Dog and all of the stuff that you do now. Because owners really struggle with working through behaviour modification, and it's a tricky thing to do. You know, we've both made a career of it, and we made a career of supporting others to do it. The added challenge when we are working with people who've adopted from shelter is there might be a different level of attachment to the dog because they might not have had the dog for very long. Like you said, the expectations might be very different of a dog that's come in 2 weeks ago versus a dog that you've had from a puppy, even if they're showing the same behaviours. And what that means is we've got to get the support right from the start. We've got to make sure that people feel heard, that they've got plans that are going to fit into their life, but still be effective and successful, and that work so that people see progress quickly. And that's what we're going to be talking about at the conference, is how do we look at a problem behaviour or a concern, particularly around frustration, and think, how do we set the people and the dog up for success so that they feel better, they see improvement? And we're not saying quick fixes because we know they don't exist, but what we're saying is moving towards the goal that we want so that the dog and the owners are living happier lives together. The dog stays in the home, and that gives us that opportunity to continue to support the owners, and that dog continues to get better and then doesn't end up back in the shelter where we start the process all over again.
This is a must for anybody to, if you are shelter staff, you're interested in the shelter world, you deal with behavior, you got to come and hear Tom speak. The Dog Behavior Conference is April 4th to the 6th. Said it's fully online. Once you register and the presentations go out live, you have access to the presentations for a year afterwards. We have incredible speakers, including Tom. You are an absolute light in the dog behavior and training world, as well as the shelter world, the rescue world. And I want to say from myself and from all of your fans, because there are many of them, thank you for all of the work that you do, and which I know is tough, but I'm so glad that you've got your outlets. And I am, as I said, North Devon's probably one of my favorite places in the whole of the UK. So I am completely jealous that you're moving even closer to the beach. But thank you so much, for all that you do and for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you very much for having me. And like they say, you know, we can only do it stood on the shoulders of giants. And for me, Vicky, you are one of those people. So
thank you.
I really appreciate you setting me on this journey.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate that too. Now, if people want to know more about you, because you do have a great Facebook page, don't you? Simplifying, isn't it? Simplifying Shelter Behaviour?
Yeah, so that's the best place at the minute, Simplifying Shelter Behaviour. I've also got a podcast, but all the links are on there. And that gives tips and tricks to improve behavioural health in shelter and rescue. That's the main aim of what I'm trying to do. And there'll be a website coming soon as well, but it's not quite there yet. So the Facebook page is the best place.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
That's it, guys. I'm so glad that you've joined me on the podcast again. I hope that you have a good week, and I will see you guys next week. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to Victoria Stilwell's Positively podcast. For Victoria's online dog training courses, more information, and helpful dog training tips, visit Victoria's official website at positively.com. Get connected on Facebook, Instagram, and other social media as Victoria Stilwell, and follow her on Twitter at Victoria S. Learn to become a professional dog trainer with the Victoria Stilwell Academy at vsdogtrainingacademy.com. And be sure to tune in next time as Victoria helps you and your dog live your best life together, positively.